Welcome to the fourth video of Secrets of the Universe, Walking the Conscious Path with Steve Hasenberg. I'm Greg Agnew. This video is titled Buddha's Last Fear. So Steve, what is Buddha's last fear?
I'm going to get to that in a minute.
Okay, tease.
It's a tease title.
It is.
I'm using Buddha, and I want to say to the audience, this is not just about Buddhism. My studies have taken me to Persia and an extraordinary study of Sufism and a love of Rumi and Hafez and many of the other Sufi poets. Also to Vedanta, the Vedic, deep Vedic understandings about life in the Upanishads, the Rig Veda. Also Taoism and also mystical Christianity. So all of these will be part of the series. I'm using Buddha's last fear because when Buddha sat below the Bodhi Tree, he made a statement to God, to himself, that he wouldn't move until he attained liberation. He said, I'm prepared to face my death now, and if I don't liberate, I'll die. But I want to take you back to how that started. So Buddha was the prince of a kingdom. His father was the king. His father wanted to spare Buddha what we call the drama of life, which we've talked about.
Yeah.
Everybody's novel being written, the depth and pain and sorrow.
So he wanted to protect his son completely.
Completely. Mm-hmm. There were walls around the kingdom. He didn't want his son to leave the walls, to go beyond and see the people in the city who perhaps were dying of illness, of old age. So of course, if somebody is prohibited from doing something, like my daughter or your daughter,
right,
it's all they want to do. What's on the other side of the wall?
And they will manage it somehow.
They will do it, right? So I think Buddha became obsessive compulsive, if we use a psychological term, about getting on the other side of that wall. One night he dressed up like one of the monks who lived in the kingdom surrounded by the wall, and he snuck out and he walked around the city and he saw somebody dying and he saw what old age looked like in its most gruesome aspects. And he saw death. He saw somebody who was dead. And he was so overwhelmed by it. He decided that day, as the story goes, that his mission in life was to overcome human suffering. Finally, he got married. I think he was 19 when he got married, in an arranged marriage. He had a son. And at 26 years old, he left them, which was not uncommon, to seek God. And he spent the next 6 or 7 years as an ascetic, trying to beat himself, to starve himself into liberation. Nothing worked. He went from teacher to teacher. And so that night he was in the forest and he sat down below the Bodhi tree and he made that statement, I'm here until I die or I will be free. He didn't know what to expect. But soon after that, what he began to experience was his own mind. And in his mind were negative thoughts, and in his body, negative feelings. He had anger, he had pride, he had jealousy. And what happened was that he had to sit through. He was practicing mindfulness before mindfulness was in vogue,
right?
Because he created it. He sat without moving. He sat through his anger, and his anger in the old stories come as big weather systems thunder, lightning, sleet, rain. He sat through it all, but he still wasn't free. And so the last part of his mind came to him from the outside. And the last part was Mara, who was the goddess. Mara means death, the goddess of death. And she came with an army, and the army had bows and arrows, and the arrows were flaming. And all of the army started shooting flaming arrows at the Buddha, and he didn't move. And as the arrows hit the ground, they turned into flowers. And so that meant he had overcome death. But there was one little thing left that Mara had, and that was her 3 daughters. And her daughters stood before the Buddha and started unclothing themselves. And he didn't move. One daughter was called attachment, one daughter was called aversion, and one daughter was called illusion. And he didn't move. And he attained enlightenment that day. The reason this story is so important, and it goes on, and we may finish it, there's more parts to it, but right. The reason the story is so profoundly important is because Buddha had everything. He had a kingdom that he could have stayed in. He had a beautiful wife. He had a beautiful son. But he was venturing on because he wanted to overcome suffering for himself, but all of humanity. And he kept on his conscious journey. Right. He was walking the conscious path, and he wanted to awaken. So when I use the word liberate, freedom, awaken, they're all the same. So there was nothing to stop him, and the obstacle was himself. Facing yourself, working with your judgments and your criticisms and your condemnation is the way through the ordinary mind. The Buddha had to go through his ordinary mind to get to his extraordinary mind. And that's what everybody does. The Buddha's journey is every person's journey on the spiritual path.
What is the best way for them to do that?
The best way for people to do that, well, everybody has their own route. I never tell anybody what route to take. There are 1,000 paths up the mountain. But I always say, and this is in the ancient sacred traditions as well, you want to find a path with heart. Because what I found from my own experiences is that the portal to love, to heaven, to peace is through the heart. Mm-hmm. And so the Buddha overcame his mind, and by overcoming his mind, he went into his heart, and he could no longer die. He couldn't be killed. It's a beautiful story.
Right, right. Is this something you believe everyone is capable of achieving?
Yes. Again, I have to always go back to the old stories, right? The old traditions, also the indigenous traditions and the mystical traditions. And what we were talking about, I think in video number 2, was the fact that we have gone from a more unified experience of nature and ourselves into a more singular experience. And that singular experience is dividing and separating. So we no longer have the ability to talk to plants like the Native Americans did, or to listen to the river, and the river used to speak to them. They would go to the river, put their ear to the river, and hear what was going on 150 miles away in the next tribe. These things that are magical, that we now, I call secrets, are within us. Everybody has this capacity, but we have moved from them into a very different kind of earth experience where most of our life is mediated by our minds and not mediated by our heart. Right. So everybody has a heart, everybody has experienced love, and all we're talking about is making that more important in our life. You can do that in service. You can take care of animals, old people. You can do that in your relationship this afternoon by going back to the person you love, whoever that is, and being more demonstrable. You can do that at work by complimenting somebody. I have a new program that I'm doing, which I told you about at lunch.
Right.
Where every time somebody is nice to me, in a big corporate setting, if I have to call Verizon or Blue Cross, I say, you've been an extraordinary, remarkable human being. I'd like to talk to your supervisor and compliment you about it.
Which must blow them away.
It does.
Yeah,
right?
totally surprised. Yeah. I find it so fascinating that so many of these ancient cultures have basically the same belief in that you can overcome and that we are all part of the same existence.
The single fabric.
And yet they had no communication with each other in any way for thousands and thousands of years.
Right.
But it's almost like it is a universal truth because there it is, everywhere on earth.
They're tuned in. They're not jaded. It's more natural, right? Science is wonderful. I love science. The Industrial Revolution has also been wonderful.
Right.
And so we've learned to heal things. We've learned to build things. But in that process, we've forgotten ourselves. And we've forgotten where we've come from. And that's why I spend so much time with the ancient traditions. They talk about the forms of earth, that matter itself was sacred. Matter was a gift from the gods. Could have been from Wankatonka in the Native American tradition.
Right.
It could have been from the tavern in the Sufi tradition. That all matter was sacred. All matter and the stars and the heavens were all speaking to each other. That everything was in an intercommunication where one felt at home on the earth rather than homeless. So individuals understood their purpose, not because of the skills that they learned, but those were important, but also because what they were taught about how integrated they were into the cosmos. And they all had creation stories. Creation stories are almost all the same.
Right.
How they got here, where they were going afterwards, who was waiting for them. That the Native Americans spoke to the ancestors is not an imagination. It's not a dream. It's the truth of it all. They had that ability because they were connected. Chief Seattle said, there is no death, there's only a change of worlds. This is the idea. They're different realms, and when you're plugged in, and when you're deeper within yourself, and when your heart is more open, you have access to those worlds.
We have a lot of work to do to get back to where we started.
Right?
Yeah.
But the good news is that we're already there. It's not that that's gone. It's like an underground river that we can always draw from. That river hasn't left us. We've left the river.
What's in the fifth video?
The fifth video, I think we're going to do near-death experiences and begin to take a look at how they can inform us.
Thank you for watching Secrets of the Universe, Walking the Conscious Path with Steve Hasenberg. I'm Greg Agnew.